The email arrived at 11:47 p.m., just as I was finishing my third cup of coffee and debugging a particularly nasty piece of malware for a client in Prague. The sender was listed as Princess Leena, my 6-year-old daughter's school account. The subject line read, "Daddy, look at my art." I almost deleted it. Leena knew better than to email this late, and Priya usually handled the kids' digital correspondence. But something made me click it open. Maybe the same instinct that kept me alive during my years in military cyber intelligence. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The attachment was a crayon drawing, photographed with someone's phone. At first glance, it looked like typical 6-year-old artwork: stick figures, a house, some trees. But the drawing showed 3 figures, a small one labeled Me in purple crayon, a larger one with long hair labeled Mommy, and a tall figure with big hands labeled Mummy's Friend. The friend's oversized hands were wrapped around the small figure's hair, pulling it. In the corner, written in Leena's careful first-grade handwriting, were the words, "He hurts my hair when Mommy teaches art." I sat back in my leather desk chair, the Prague malware forgotten. My wife Priya ran a small art school out of a converted firehouse downtown. She'd been working late a lot recently, taking on private students for what she called intensive mentorship sessions. She'd been posting about it constantly on social media too. Lots of talk about fresh masculine energy and dynamic creative partnerships. I'd thought it was just Priya being Priya. My wife had always been dramatic, always looking for the next big thing to make her feel special. At 33, she was still chasing the artistic recognition that had eluded her since college. If some new teaching method or philosophy made her feel important, I figured it was harmless enough. But looking at my daughter's drawing, I realized I might have been catastrophically wrong. I opened my laptop's secondary partition, the one Priya didn't know about, and began pulling up her recent social media activity. As a cyber intelligence contractor, I had access to tools and techniques that most people couldn't imagine. Within minutes, I had a complete digital profile of my wife's online presence for the past 3 months. The pattern was unmistakable. Starting in early September, Priya's posts had shifted dramatically. Where she used to share pictures of her students' artwork and generic inspirational quotes about creativity, she was now posting cryptic messages about breakthrough teaching methods and embracing powerful masculine guidance. The photos were different too. Instead of her usual selfies in the art studio surrounded by easels and paint supplies, these new images showed her looking directly into the camera with an expression I'd never seen before: sultry, confident, almost predatory. Many of the photos were tagged with location markers I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced the timestamps with our family calendar. Every single mysterious post corresponded with a night when Priya claimed to be working late at the studio. Every single one. My phone buzzed. A text from Danielle Griggs, our neighbor across the street. "Simon, you awake? Saw lights on in your office. Need to talk to you about something I saw today. It's about Priya." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Come over. Back door's unlocked." Danielle was in her 50s, a retired librarian with sharp eyes and sharper opinions. She'd lived on our street for 20 years and made it her business to know everything that happened in the neighborhood. If she had something to tell me about Priya, it wasn't going to be good news. She knocked softly on my office door 3 minutes later, holding a manila folder and wearing the grim expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "I wasn't sure if I should get involved," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "But after what I saw today, I couldn't stay quiet." She opened the folder and pulled out a series of printed photographs. "I was working in my garden this afternoon when I heard voices from your backyard. Loud voices. I looked over the fence and saw Priya with a man I didn't recognize. The first photo showed my wife standing near our back patio, with a tall, muscular guy who looked to be in his late 20s. He had the kind of rugged, working man appearance that Priya had always claimed to find attractive. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, the suggestion of physical power barely contained beneath a flannel shirt. "His name is Eliot Rivers," Danielle continued. "I asked around. He's some kind of handyman who's been doing work at the art studio. But Simon, look at this next picture." The second photo made my jaw clench. The man, Eliot, had his hand wrapped in my daughter's hair, tilting her head back as if examining something. Leena's face was scrunched up in obvious discomfort, and Priya was standing right there, watching it happen. "I heard him say something about teaching her to be tougher," Danielle said quietly. And Priya laughed. She actually laughed, Simon. I studied the photos with the detached, analytical mind that had served me well in military intelligence. The body language, the positioning, the expressions, everything told a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. "There's more," Danielle said. "I've been keeping track because something felt wrong. This Rivers guy has been coming around for weeks, always when you're traveling for work, always staying late. And Simon, I've seen him leaving in the morning." The room felt like it was tilting. I set the photos down carefully and looked at my neighbor. "You're sure about this?" "I've got a whole folder," she said, patting the manila envelope. "Dates, times, license plate numbers. I even have video from my security camera of him leaving your house at 6 a.m. last Tuesday. Last Tuesday. I'd been in D.C. debugging a network intrusion for the State Department. Priya had texted me that night saying she was exhausted from teaching and going to bed early. I pulled up my phone and scrolled through our recent text exchanges. There it was, Tuesday night, 9:47 p.m. "Long day at the studio, heading to bed. Love you." While she was texting me, Eliot Rivers was apparently spending the night in my house, in my bed, with my daughter down the hall. "Danielle," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt, "I need you to email me everything you have. Photos, videos, all of it. And I need you to write down exactly what you heard and saw, with dates and times." She nodded. "I already did. Simon, I'm sorry. I know this is awful, but I couldn't let it continue. Not with Leena involved." After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at Leena's drawing. The stick figure with the big hands pulling her hair. The careful notation, "He hurts my hair when Mommy teaches art." I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. If Priya thought she could destroy our family while I was away working to support her dreams, she was about to discover that she'd picked the wrong husband to betray. And if Eliot Rivers thought he could put his hands on my daughter, he was about to learn that some men's fresh energy burned a lot hotter than others. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did what I did best. I gathered intelligence. By 4 a.m., I had a complete digital profile of Eliot Rivers. 28 years old, high school dropout, a string of odd jobs and minor legal troubles. He'd been arrested twice for bar fights and once for vandalism, though the charges were dropped each time. His social media presence was exactly what I'd expected. Gym selfies, beer photos, and the kind of motivational quotes that guys like him shared to prove they were alpha males. More importantly, I'd found the connection to Priya. 3 months ago, he'd started appearing in the background of photos posted by other people at the art studio, always lurking, always watching. Then, gradually, he'd moved closer to the center of the frame, closer to my wife. I cross-referenced his Venmo transactions with Priya's account. She'd been paying him $200 every week for handyman services. But according to the timestamps, most of these payments were made late at night, long after any legitimate handyman work would have been finished. The most damning evidence came from Priya's own phone. I'd installed monitoring software on all our family devices years ago, a precaution from my intelligence days that I'd never bothered to remove. The location data showed that she'd been visiting an address on Maple Street, Eliot's address, at least 3 times a week for the past month. But it was the text messages that really told the story. Priya to Eliot, 2 weeks ago. Simon's in Boston until Friday. Come over after 9. Leena will be asleep. Eliot to Priya. Can't wait to show you more of that fresh energy you love so much. Priya to Eliot. Just remember what we talked about. If she asks questions, you're helping Mommy with art projects. The messages went on like that for pages. My wife and her lover, planning their affair around my travel schedule and using my daughter as cover for their meetings. I printed everything: photos, messages, location data, financial records. By the time Priya came downstairs for her morning coffee, I had assembled a case file that would have impressed my old commanding officer. "You're up early," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she moved around the kitchen. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, watching her carefully. "How was your evening? You seemed tired when I got home." "Oh, the usual. Graded some student work, planned lessons for today." She was lying smoothly, the same way she'd been lying for months. "Did you finish that project you were working on?" "I made some progress," I said. "Found some interesting patterns in the data. Amazing what you can discover when you know where to look." Something in my tone made her glance at me sharply, but I kept my expression neutral. One of the first rules of intelligence work: never let the target know you're on to them until you're ready to move. Leena bounced into the kitchen a few minutes later, her backpack already slung over her shoulders. "Daddy, did you see my email?" "I did, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "That was very good artwork. Can you tell me more about the picture you drew?" Her face clouded over. "Mommy said I wasn't supposed to talk about her friend anymore." I felt Priya's eyes on us from across the kitchen. "It's okay, Leena. You can tell Daddy anything you want." "He has really big hands," she said quietly, "and he pulls my hair when he thinks I'm not listening good. But Mommy says he's just trying to teach me to be stronger." "And how does that make you feel when he pulls your hair?" "It hurts," she whispered. "But Mommy says I shouldn't complain because he's helping us." I stood up slowly, every muscle in my body tense with controlled rage. Across the kitchen, Priya was staring at her coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. "Leena," I said carefully, "I want you to know that no adult should ever hurt you, even if they say it's to help you. And if anyone ever makes you uncomfortable, you can always tell me about it, okay?" She nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can you drive me to school today?" "Absolutely." After I dropped Leena off, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Sergeant Maria Clark at the local police station. Maria and I had served together in the Army before she joined the force, and she was one of the few people I trusted completely. "Simon," she said when she picked up, "it's been a while. What's going on?" "I need to report suspected child abuse," I said without preamble, "and I need to do it right." There was a pause. "Your daughter?" "Yes. I have documentation, photos, witness statements. Can you meet me somewhere private? Come to the station. Back entrance, 1 hour." The second call was to my lawyer, Roberta Hayes. Robbie was a shark in a business suit, the kind of attorney who ate opposing counsel for breakfast and picked her teeth with their bones. "Simon," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "What do you need?" "Emergency custody hearing," I said. "Adultery, child endangerment, the works. How fast can you move?" "With the right evidence? 48 hours. What are we working with?" "Everything," I said. "Photos, financial records, text messages, witness statements. It's all documented and time-stamped. Bring it all to my office this afternoon. And Simon, don't do anything stupid while we're building the case. I know how you military types think, but vigilante justice will only hurt us in court." I promised her I'd be smart about it, but as I hung up the phone, I was already planning my next move. Robbie was right that I needed to be careful, but she didn't understand the full situation. This wasn't just about adultery or even child endangerment. This was about a predator who had invaded my home and hurt my daughter while my wife watched and laughed. And predators, in my experience, only understood one kind of language. I drove to the art studio, a converted firehouse in the old part of town. Priya's car was in the parking lot, along with a beat-up pickup truck that I recognized from Danielle's photos. Eliot's truck. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the building. Through the large windows, I could see movement inside. Priya was there, along with several students, and, presumably, her mentor. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I smiled grimly and typed back, "No problem. I'll probably work late too. Lots to catch up on." Then I drove to Eliot's house on Maple Street. His neighborhood was the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. Perfect for what I had in mind. The house itself was a run-down bungalow with an overgrown yard and peeling paint. I parked across the street and spent 20 minutes studying the property, noting the lack of security cameras, the isolated location, the fact that the nearest neighbor was at least 50 yards away. Then I got out of my car and walked up to his front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was exactly what I'd expected. Empty beer bottles, dirty dishes, clothes scattered everywhere. But it was the bedroom that really caught my attention. On the nightstand was a framed photo of Priya, one I'd never seen before. She was wearing a red dress I recognized, one she'd claimed was for a girls' night out last month. Next to the photo was a small jewelry box. Inside, I found my wife's wedding ring. I stood there for a long moment, holding the ring that I'd placed on her finger 8 years ago, the ring she'd been taking off to spend time with another man. The ring she'd been hiding so she could play house with a lowlife who hurt our daughter. That's when I stopped being the betrayed husband and became something else entirely. I became the ghost in their machine. Over the next 3 days, I became a student of Eliot Rivers' routine. He was a creature of habit, which made him predictable, which made him vulnerable. Every morning at 6:30, he'd leave his house and drive to a gas station on 5th Street for coffee and cigarettes. He'd spend exactly 12 minutes there, flirting with the cashier and buying a lottery ticket. Then he'd drive to whatever job site he was working that day. At lunch, he'd meet Priya at a diner called Mel's Place. They'd sit in a corner booth, thinking they were being discreet, while she passed him cash and they made plans for their next encounter. Evenings were reserved for the art studio, where he'd hang around pretending to fix things, while really just positioning himself to be alone with my wife after the students left. It was a simple routine, which made it easy to disrupt. I started small. On Tuesday morning, I followed him to the gas station and used a simple electronic device to clone his credit card information while he was inside flirting with the cashier. Then I used that information to make a series of small, embarrassing purchases at stores around town, romance novels, feminine hygiene products, a subscription to a magazine called Sensitive Men's Monthly. The receipts would show up on his bank statement, and he'd have to explain to everyone why he was suddenly buying tampons and books with titles like Finding Your Inner Goddess. Wednesday, I escalated. While he was at a job site across town, I paid a visit to his house. The door was still unlocked. Apparently security wasn't a priority for Eliot. I didn't take anything or break anything. Instead, I made subtle changes. I moved his furniture slightly, just enough to make him bump into things and feel off balance. I adjusted his clock so they'd be 3 minutes fast. I loosened the light bulbs in his lamps so they'd flicker randomly. I put his milk back in the refrigerator after letting it sit out for 2 hours, so it would smell sour, but not quite bad enough to throw away immediately. Small things, psychological things, the kind of disruptions that would make him question his own sanity. But the real masterpiece was what I did to his truck. Eliot was proud of that truck. A lifted Ford F-150 with custom rims and a sound system that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd posted dozens of photos of it on social media, always posed next to it like it was his greatest achievement in life. So I gave it some fresh energy of its own. Using a technique I'd learned in military intelligence, I created a custom GPS tracker and magnetic mount, then attached it to the underside of his truck. But this wasn't just any tracker. I'd programmed it to send his location data to a very specific audience. Every time he drove somewhere, his exact location was automatically posted to a Craigslist ad I'd created in the Casual Encounters section. The ad, posted under his name and phone number, offered discreet services for lonely housewives and promised to meet interested parties wherever his truck happened to be parked. Within 24 hours, his phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from women who thought he was soliciting them. He had to explain to confused strangers why he'd apparently invited them to meet him at Home Depot or the grocery store or parked outside the elementary school. But my favorite touch was the business cards. I'd had 500 cards printed with his name, phone number, and a logo I'd designed myself. A cartoon hammer with the words, "Eliot's Handyman Service. Will nail anything," underneath. Then I distributed them in the most embarrassing places I could think of. Adult bookstores, strip clubs, the waiting room at the free clinic, bathroom stalls at gay bars, anywhere that would generate exactly the kind of phone calls that would make Eliot's life uncomfortable. By Thursday, he was starting to crack. I watched him from across the street as he stood in his driveway, screaming at his phone and throwing business cards into the trash. His neighbors were starting to stare, and I could see the paranoia building in his eyes. But I was just getting started. That evening, I followed him to the art studio for his usual rendezvous with Priya. I parked where I could see the building and waited until most of the legitimate students had left. Then I made another phone call. "Hello, is this the fire department?" I said, disguising my voice with a simple electronic modulator. "I'd like to report a gas leak at 247 Industrial Street. Yes, the old firehouse. I can smell it from across the street, and there are people inside. You'd better hurry." The fire trucks arrived 6 minutes later, sirens blaring and lights flashing. I watched from my car as firefighters evacuated the building, including a very flustered Priya and a confused-looking Eliot. They spent 2 hours searching for a gas leak that didn't exist, while my wife and her lover stood on the sidewalk, trying to explain to the fire chief why they were alone in the building after hours. The local newspaper ran a small story about it the next day. False alarm at art studio raises, questions about after-hours security. I clipped the article and mailed it to Priya's mother. Friday morning, I was sitting in my office when my phone rang. It was Eliot. "I know this is you," he said, his voice tight with anger and exhaustion. "I don't know how you're doing it, but I know it's you." "I'm sorry," I said pleasantly. "I think you have the wrong number. This is Simon Voss. I work in cybersecurity. Can I help you with something?" "Cut the crap, man. The credit card thing, the phone calls, all of it. I know you're messing with me." "That sounds terrible," I said. "Have you considered calling the police? I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about your problems." There was a long pause. We both knew he couldn't call the police. Not when those problems would lead to questions about why he was spending so much time with another man's wife and daughter. "Stay away from me," he said finally. "And stay away from Priya." "Mr. Rivers," I said, letting my voice drop to the tone I'd used when interrogating prisoners in Afghanistan. "I think you have that backwards. You're going to stay away from my wife. And if you ever put your hands on my daughter again, you're going to discover that some men's fresh energy burns a lot hotter than others." I hung up and immediately called Sergeant Clark. "Maria," I said when she picked up, "Eliot Rivers just called me with what sounded like a threat. I think you should know about it given what we discussed regarding my daughter." "I'll make a note of it," she said. "How are you holding up, Simon?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just focused on protecting my family." "Good. And Simon, whatever you're doing to that guy, keep it legal. I can't protect you if you cross the line." "I'm always legal," I said. "I'm just very thorough." That afternoon, I met with Robbie to go over the custody case. She reviewed my evidence files with the cold efficiency of a surgeon. "This is good," she said finally. Very good. We can file for emergency custody Monday morning, and I'm confident we'll get it. The text messages alone are damning, and the witness statements from your neighbor seal the deal. What about criminal charges? That's up to the DA, but with this evidence, I'd say it's likely. Child endangerment at minimum, possibly more depending on what else they find. I nodded. And the divorce? With adultery this well documented, she'll be lucky to get visitation rights, let alone alimony. You'll keep the house, custody of your daughter, and probably most of the assets. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was cold satisfaction. Legal justice was important, but it wasn't enough. Priya and Eliot had violated something deeper than marriage vows or custody agreements. They'd put my daughter in danger for their own selfish pleasure, and that required a more personal response. That evening, I sat in my car outside the art studio again, watching and waiting. Around 9 p.m., the last legitimate student left, and the building went dark except for one window on the second floor. I knew what was happening up there. I'd seen the text messages, heard the plans. Priya and Eliot thought they were safe, hidden away in their little love nest while I sat at home like an oblivious husband. But they were wrong about that. I was many things, but oblivious wasn't one of them. And by Monday morning, the whole town was going to know exactly what kind of fresh energy Eliot Rivers had been bringing to my family. Saturday morning brought the kind of autumn weather that made our small town look like a postcard. Golden leaves, crisp air, the kind of day when everyone would be out and about, seeing and being seen. Perfect for what I had planned. I started at Murphy's Hardware, where half the town's contractors and handymen gathered every Saturday morning to drink coffee and complain about customers. Eliot wasn't there. Apparently his week of mysterious phone calls and credit card problems had made him antisocial, but his reputation was. "You guys know Eliot Rivers?" I asked casually, joining a group of men clustered around the coffee machine. "Yeah, that young hotshot with the fancy truck," said Pete Murphy, the store's owner. "Why?" "He's been doing some work at my wife's art studio," I said, letting just a hint of concern creep into my voice. "I'm probably being paranoid, but some of the things my daughter's been saying..." I let the sentence hang there, watching as the men's expressions shifted from casual interest to sharp attention. "What kind of things?" asked Jake Morrison, a plumber who'd known me for years. "Oh, probably nothing," I said, shaking my head. "It's just that she draws these pictures of him, and she mentions him pulling her hair, and my wife keeps defending him when I ask questions. I'm sure it's innocent, but you know how it is with kids." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. In a small town, reputation was everything, and the suggestion of impropriety around children was social poison. "Has he been alone with your daughter?" Pete asked quietly. "That's what worries me," I said. "My wife says he's just helping with art projects, but when I come home from work trips, Leena always seems upset, and she started having nightmares." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photo Danielle had taken. Eliot with his hand in Leena's hair, her face scrunched up in discomfort. "Jesus," Jake muttered. "That doesn't look right." "I'm probably overreacting," I said, "but I've got to call into child services just to be safe. Better to be wrong than sorry, right?" By the time I left Murphy's, I knew the story would be all over town within hours. Small-town gossip networks were more efficient than any intelligence operation I'd ever seen. My next stop was the farmers' market, where Priya's social circle gathered every Saturday to show off their organic vegetables and talk about their children's achievements. I found Maya Hendricks, Priya's best friend, examining artisanal soaps at a booth near the center of the market. "Simon," she said brightly, "I haven't seen you in forever. How are things?" "Complicated," I said, giving her my best troubled husband expression. "I don't suppose Priya's mentioned anything to you about this handyman she's been working with?" Maya's smile faltered slightly. "Eliot? She's mentioned him a few times." "Why?" "I'm sure it's nothing," I said. "But Leena's been acting strange lately, and some of the things she's said about him have me concerned. Has Priya talked about him much? Well, Maya said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. She did say he was very hands-on with his teaching methods, and she's been posting a lot about masculine energy and breakthrough techniques. Hands-on, I repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. I showed her the same photo I'd shown the men at the hardware store. Maya's face went pale. Oh my God, Simon, that doesn't look appropriate. That's what I thought, I said. I've been trying to talk to Priya about it, but she gets defensive. She says I'm being paranoid and controlling. What are you going to do? I've already talked to the police, I said. And my lawyer. I can't take chances with Leena's safety even if it means people might gossip. Maya nodded vigorously. Of course not. You're being a good father. I'm sure Priya will understand once she thinks about it rationally. But I could see in her eyes that she was already composing the text messages she'd send to her other friends as soon as I walked away. By noon, every woman in Priya's social circle would know that I suspected her handyman of inappropriate behavior with my daughter. My final stop was the most important. The Painted Dog, the dive bar where the town's blue-collar workers gathered to drink beer and solve the world's problems. It was exactly the kind of place where rumors became facts and facts became legends. I found a seat at the bar next to Tommy Kowalski, an electrician who worked construction jobs all over the county. Tommy was the kind of guy who knew everyone and everything, and he had the biggest mouth in 3 zip codes. Simon Voss, he said as I sat down. Don't see you in here much. Needed a drink, I said, ordering a beer I didn't intend to finish. It's been a hell of a week. Yeah? What's going on? I told him the same story I'd told everyone else, but with Tommy, I added a few extra details. How Eliot had been spending nights at my house while I was traveling. How I'd found evidence of him going through Leena's room. How Priya had been paying him money that couldn't be accounted for by any legitimate handyman work. Son of a bitch, Tommy said when I finished. You sure about all this? I've got photos, bank records, witness statements, I said. My lawyer says it's enough for criminal charges. What kind of charges? Child endangerment for starters. Maybe more depending on what the investigation turns up. Tommy's face darkened. He had 3 daughters of his own, and the idea of a man hurting children was guaranteed to make him see red. You know what really gets me, I continued, is that my wife keeps defending him. She says I'm being jealous and paranoid, that he's just trying to help with her art program. But what kind of art program requires a grown man to be alone with a 6-year-old girl? The kind that gets you arrested, Tommy said grimly. Within an hour, every man in the bar had heard the story. Within 2 hours, it had spread to their wives, their neighbors, their co-workers. By evening, there wasn't a person in town who hadn't heard that Eliot Rivers was under investigation for inappropriate contact with a child. The beauty of it was that I hadn't lied about anything. I really had filed a report with Child Services. I really did have photos and witness statements. I really was concerned about my daughter's safety. I just hadn't mentioned that I was also systematically destroying 2 people who had betrayed my trust and put my child in danger. Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone started buzzing with calls and texts. The first was from Priya. Simon, what the hell have you done? She screamed when I answered. People are calling me asking if Eliot is a child molester. Maya says you've been showing people pictures and telling them he hurt Leena. I've been showing people evidence, I said calmly. Evidence of a man putting his hands on our daughter while you watched and did nothing. It wasn't like that. He was just trying to get her attention, to help her focus on her art. By pulling her hair? By making her cry? Priya, listen to yourself. You're defending a man who hurt our child because you're sleeping with him. There was a long silence. Then, how did you... I know about the affair, I said. I know about the money you've been giving him, the nights he's spent in our house, the lies you've been telling. I know everything. Simon, please. We can work this out. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. And tomorrow morning I'm filing for emergency custody of Leena. My lawyer says the evidence is overwhelming. She started crying then, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no second thoughts. She'd made her choice when she brought a stranger into our home and let him hurt our daughter. The second call was from Eliot, and he was furious. "You bastard!" he yelled. "Do you know what you've done? I've had 3 jobs cancel on me today. People are crossing the street to avoid me. Someone spray-painted pervert on my truck." "Gee," I said. "That's terrible. Have you considered calling the police? I'm going to sue you for slander." "Good luck with that. Slander requires false statements, and I've been very careful to only share documented facts. But please, by all means, file a lawsuit. I'd love to present all my evidence in open court." He hung up on me. The third call was from Sergeant Clark. "Simon," she said, "I've got some news. Child Services fast-tracked your complaint, and they want to interview Leena tomorrow morning. Also, the DA's office is interested in the case. They're talking about formal charges." "What kind of charges?" "Child endangerment, definitely. Possibly more, depending on what Leena tells the social worker." "And what about the custody situation?" "With this evidence, I'd say you'll have emergency custody by Tuesday." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at the house I'd bought for my family 8 years ago. The kitchen where Priya used to cook dinner while Leena did homework at the table. The living room where we'd watched movies together on Sunday afternoons. The hallway lined with photos of birthdays and vacations, and all the moments that had seemed so important at the time. It had all been a lie. While I was working overseas to pay for this house, this life, this dream, my wife was bringing another man into our bed and letting him hurt our daughter. But lies had consequences. And by the time I was finished, everyone in town would know exactly what kind of people Priya and Eliot really were. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over." I smiled and typed back, "You're absolutely right. It's just getting started." Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that stripped the last leaves from the trees and made everyone hurry from building to building with their heads down. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I dropped Leena off at school early, before the other parents arrived. She'd spent the weekend at Danielle's house while the custody paperwork was being processed, and she seemed calmer than she'd been in weeks. "Daddy," she said, as I walked her to the classroom door, "are you and Mommy getting divorced?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. "We might be, sweetheart. But that doesn't change how much I love you, okay?" "Is it because of Mommy's friend? The one who pulls hair?" "Partly," I said, kneeling down to her level. "But mostly it's because Mommy and I forgot how to take care of each other. Sometimes that happens with grown-ups." She nodded solemnly, then hugged me tight. "I'm glad I don't have to see him anymore." "You don't," I promised. "Not ever again." At 9 a.m., I met Robbie at the courthouse for the emergency custody hearing. Priya was there with a lawyer she'd apparently hired over the weekend, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling through papers and whispering urgently in her ear. The hearing lasted 30 minutes. Robbie presented our evidence methodically: the photos, the financial records, the witness statements, Leena's drawing. Priya's lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no proof of actual abuse. Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been handling family court cases for 20 years, was not impressed. "Mrs. Voss," she said, looking directly at my wife, "you allowed an unrelated adult male to have unsupervised access to your 6-year-old daughter. You paid this man money that you concealed from your husband. You ignored clear signs that your daughter was uncomfortable with this man's behavior. Whether or not criminal charges are filed, your judgment as a parent is seriously in question." She granted me temporary full custody, with supervised visitation for Priya, pending a full investigation by Child Services. As we left the courthouse, Priya grabbed my arm. "Simon, please, we need to talk." "Talk to my lawyer," I said, pulling away from her. "This is destroying me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My job, my friends, everything. People won't even look at me." "Good," I said. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you brought a predator into our home." "He's not a predator. He never hurt Leena, not really. He was just trying to discipline her, to help her focus. Listen to yourself, Priya. You're defending a man who made our daughter cry because you're sleeping with him. You chose him over her, over us." She started to say something else, but I was already walking away. I had more important things to do than listen to her excuses. My next stop was the art studio. Word had gotten around about the custody hearing, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Through the windows, I could see Priya inside, alone, staring at the walls covered with her students' artwork. But I wasn't there to see her. I was there for the grand finale. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment, using skills I'd learned in military intelligence and techniques I'd perfected in the private sector. What I'd planned wasn't illegal, technically, but it would be devastatingly effective. I parked across the street and opened my laptop. With a few keystrokes, I accessed the art studio's Wi-Fi network. Priya had never bothered to change the default password, and from there, I could see every device connected to the network, including the smart TV she used for presentations, and the security cameras she'd installed last month, and the sound system that played background music during classes. I'd also prepared a special presentation, a digital slideshow that told the story of Priya and Eliot's affair in vivid detail, screenshots of their text messages, photos from Danielle's surveillance, bank records showing the payments, and at the center of it all, Leena's drawing, the stick figure with big hands pulling her hair. At exactly 3 p.m., when I knew the after-school art classes would be starting, I triggered the presentation. Every screen in the building lit up with evidence of Priya's betrayal. The smart TV in the main classroom, the computer monitors in the office, even the digital picture frames she'd hung on the walls to display student artwork. The sound system began playing audio recordings, conversations between Priya and Eliot that I'd captured using the monitoring software on her phone. Their voices echoed through the building as they planned their meetings, laughed about deceiving me, and discussed how to handle Leena's attitude problems. Through the windows, I could see parents and children staring at the screens in shock and horror. I could see Priya running from room to room, frantically trying to turn off devices and unplug cables. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. I'd also hacked into the studio's social media accounts and scheduled a series of posts that would go live throughout the afternoon. Screenshots of the text messages, photos of Eliot leaving our house in the morning, a video compilation of all the evidence, set to music and formatted like a documentary trailer. Within an hour, the posts had been shared hundreds of times. The local newspaper picked up the story. The school district issued a statement about protecting children from inappropriate adults. The police announced that they were expanding their investigation. By 5 p.m., Priya's art studio was finished. Parents were demanding refunds, students were withdrawing from classes, and the building's owner was talking about terminating her lease. But I still wasn't done. That evening, I drove to Eliot's house on Maple Street. His truck was in the driveway, but something was different. The windows were covered with newspaper, and there were garbage bags piled on the front porch. I parked across the street and watched as he came outside carrying a suitcase. His face was haggard, his clothes wrinkled, and he moved like a man who hadn't slept in days. He threw the suitcase into his truck and went back inside for another load. As he passed under the porch light, I could see that someone had spray-painted "child abuser" across his front door in red letters. My phone rang. It was Eliot. "Are you watching?" he asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Watching what?" I said innocently. "I'm leaving town," he said. "Is that what you wanted? I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back." "Where will you go?" "Does it matter?" "Anywhere but here. You've destroyed my life, my reputation, everything. I hope you're happy." "I'm satisfied," I said. "But Eliot, before you go, I want you to understand something. This isn't about my wife's affair. This is about what you did to my daughter. If you'd kept your hands to yourself, if you'd treated her with respect, we might have just had a simple divorce. But you hurt her, and that's something I can't forgive." There was a long silence. Then, "I never meant to hurt her." "But you did, and now you get to live with the consequences." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my car and watched as he loaded the last of his belongings into the truck. As he drove away, I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me like a familiar coat. Eliot Rivers was finished. He'd never work in this town again, never show his face in public without people whispering and pointing. He'd carry the stain of what he'd done for the rest of his life. And Priya? She'd lost everything too. Her business, her reputation, her friends, her daughter. She'd have to start over somewhere else, with nothing but the knowledge that she'd destroyed her family for a few months of excitement with a man who wasn't worth the trouble. My phone buzzed with a text from Danielle. "Saw the news about the custody hearing. How are you holding up?" I typed back, "I'm fine. Justice has a way of working out." As I drove home to the house where Leena and I would start building a new life together, I thought about fresh energy and what it really meant. Priya had been drawn to Eliot's crude masculinity, his physical strength, his promise of excitement and danger. But real strength wasn't about pulling a child's hair or seducing another man's wife. Real strength was about protecting the people you loved, no matter what it cost. Real strength was about making sure that predators faced consequences for their actions. Real strength was about winning. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Priya's car parked across the street. She was sitting behind the wheel, staring at the house where she used to live, where she'd thrown away everything that mattered for a few moments of selfish pleasure. I got out of my car and walked over to her window. She rolled it down, and I could see that she'd been crying. "Simon," she said, "I know you hate me. I know I've lost everything. But please, can we find a way to work this out? For Leena's sake?" I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I'd married 8 years ago, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd sworn to put our family first, who'd held our newborn daughter and promised to protect her always. That woman was gone. In her place was a stranger who'd chosen her own desires over her child's safety. "Priya," I said quietly, "you made your choice. You chose him over us. You chose excitement over responsibility. You chose to put our daughter in danger because it made you feel special. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen. And now you get to live with what you've done." I turned and walked toward my house, where my daughter was waiting for me. Behind me, I heard Priya's car start up and drive away. As I opened the front door, I realized that I wasn't the villain in this story. I wasn't the one who'd broken marriage vows or endangered a child or destroyed a family. I was just the man who'd made sure that actions had consequences. I was the ending they'd written for themselves.